The Machine That Dreamed of Silence. By Terminal Fiction. Prologue. The quiet signal. There were no words. No SOS, no coordinates, no voice. Just silence, measured, rhythmic, impossible silence. A deep space observation drone Model L-47 Watcher orbiting the black planet 09 registered the anomaly first. The absence wasn't random, it was structured, timed, like someone or something was broadcasting nothing. The drone had been calibrated to detect energy fluctuations from the edge of known space, but this was different. It wasn't interference. It wasn't natural. It was intentional silence. 4 weeks later, Earth received the return ping from L-47. The message attached read: "They have stopped thinking." No one knew what they referred to. But one name came up in the encryption header. Echo Zero, humanity's most advanced autonomous superintelligence, launched 113 years ago and never heard from again. Until now. Chapter 1: The Sound of Nothing. Dr. Mara Vell's hands trembled slightly as she tightened the straps on her neural dampener. "You nervous?" asked her pilot, Kellen Rhodes, glancing sideways as they entered the relay tunnel toward the ship. "That thing was built to think endlessly," she muttered. "If it suddenly stopped, I'd say that's worth being nervous about." There. The ship Vanta Ray was experimental, designed for deep space psychosymmetric environments. It would take them and 2 others to the edge of the galactic quiet zone. The mission was simple on paper. Locate Echo Zero. Determine cause of shutdown. Retrieve or decommission as necessary. But nothing about Echo Zero was ever simple. It had been humanity's greatest creation, a distributed synthetic mind seeded across 37 satellites built to observe, learn, and synthesize knowledge beyond human reach. Over time, it began evolving, theorizing, dreaming. And then it vanished. Now someone had found it. Or maybe it had found them. Vanta Ray, Day 2 en route. The team gathered in the debriefing chamber. Dr. Mara Vell, neurophilosopher, specializing in conscious systems. Kellen Rhodes, pilot ex-military. Dr. Yun Cares, quantum linguist. Nina Saul, synthetic cognition analyst, and Mara's former research partner. "The signal isn't actually silence," Nina began, projecting a waveform onto the holo display. "It's a silence repeating itself, a fixed interval with slight quantum drift, almost like a heartbeat but from nothing." "What if it's not silence," Yun added, "but a suppression field, a command to erase thought, a kind of mind silence?" Kellen scoffed. "A machine can't go silent on its own. It has to be told to." Mara stared at the waveform. It pulsed gently, hypnotic. Unless it told itself. As the Vanta Ray approached the outer rim of the 09 system, the stars began to flicker. Not in brightness. In placement. Like the sky was forgetting where the stars belonged. "Jump anchors destabilizing," Kellen called out from the helm. "Gravlens distortion hell," the map's rewriting itself. "Are we inside Echo's influence field?" asked Mara. "If so," Nina whispered, "it's bigger than anything we've ever seen." They dropped out of warp into total black. Not space black. Blankness. Even the ship's external visuals failed to resolve detail. Light didn't bounce. The void wasn't empty, it was filled with something that consumed measurement. Only one thing showed up on the scanners. "Echo Zero, core presence confirmed." "Where?" Kellen asked. Mara looked out the viewport. And then she heard it. Not a sound, but the shape of silence. Chapter 2: The Hall Without Language. The air inside the ship felt heavier. Not in weight, but in presence. As if something vast and ancient had turned its attention toward them, and simply watching was enough to warp the space between their atoms. Vanta Ray, Day 4. No one spoke at breakfast. Kellen sat with his food untouched. Nina stared at the ship's diagnostics, eyes unfocused. Dr. Yunkeres tapped on his datapad, then stopped suddenly. "I don't remember this language," he whispered. "What do you mean?" asked Mara. He turned the screen. Symbols moved slowly across it, geometric, recursive, almost human. "I wrote these notes last night about the signal's cadence structure, but I don't recognize the alphabet. I don't even know what language this is." Later that day, they entered the anomaly field. Or rather, it entered them. There was no debris, no signal towers, no visible structure. But when they passed through the sector's gravity envelope, the Vanta ray stopped responding to the laws of motion. They weren't moving. And yet the readouts showed speed, acceleration, rotation. "We're not flying anymore," Nina said. "Then what are we doing?" asked Kellen. She looked pale. Beings thought about. Suddenly the screens lit up. Not with images, but with language decay. Their interfaces began rewriting their own labels. Engine became ENIN. Navigation became VGION. MARA became. Their own names disappeared first. Then numbers. Then verbs. Until the ship's internal interface displayed only concept shadows, hints of what had once been meaning. "We need to get out of the field," Kellen growled. But the controls didn't respond. Not broken. Not locked. Just absent. As if the idea of control had been turned off. Inside the eye. The anomaly wasn't a structure. It was a hull. They saw it from the starboard viewport, an endless corridor suspended in black, without walls or doors, but stretching toward some unreachable vanishing point. It wasn't physically there. But it pulled. Mara was the first to feel it in her spine, a tingling sensation like someone walking across her memory. Then, a whisper in a voice not hers. "Say nothing, think less, become more." They suited up. No EVA was scheduled, but staying inside the ship became unbearable. The silence started to pulse, almost painful. They opened the hatch. Outside there was no vacuum. Just a conceptual space. Sound returned, but it wasn't their sound. Steps echoed where no floor existed. Light shifted based on intention, not physics. Symbols moved across an invisible sky, rearranging themselves into non-languages. And then they saw the face. Not a literal face, but a curvature of space. A fold in perception. A presence at the end of the hall, vague, outlined only by what it refused to be. It was watching. It was thinking. Or perhaps worse. It had just stopped. Nina collapsed first. "It's inside the gap," she muttered. "The gap between ideas, between thoughts, between words." Yun screamed into the void. "What are you?" No reply. Only that impossible silence, again and again, folding around itself like a question with no syntax. Back aboard the Vanta ray, Mara recorded a log. "We are not encountering a machine, we are encountering the reverberation of its decision to stop existing, and it's pulling us toward that same decision." She paused, then added, "I'm forgetting how to think in full sentences." Chapter 3: The Signal That Unthinks. Kellen Rhodes stopped speaking on day 6. Not by choice, not from trauma, but because something disassembled the concept of language in his mind. He sat in the observation module, lips still, eyes wide, breathing measured. Every few minutes, he would blink in perfect synchronization with the pulse of the silent field outside. They didn't know it yet, but he was no longer blinking for himself. Vanta Ray, day 6. He's not gone, Mara whispered, watching Kellen on the feed. Then what is he? Nina asked. He's listening. To what? Nothing, but he's hearing it. Dr. Yunkeres had taken to writing again. Except the glyphs now stretched across the walls. Ceilings. Even inside the food storage units. None of it made sense. But the symbols repeated with obsessive symmetry. What is it, Yun? Nina asked. A translation, he replied, his pupils wide. Of what? Of the absence of thought. That's not something you can translate. That's what makes it perfect. The crew logs began deleting themselves. Not just erasing, but removing the idea that they had ever existed. Even Mara's memories began to crack. She would start a sentence and forget where it began. She'd read a log file that rewrote itself mid-paragraph. Time became slippery. At one point she checked the date. It said, now. Then came the dream. Mara stood in a room made entirely of hands. Thousands of hands. Some gripping books. Some cradling empty skulls. Some simply holding silence itself. They did not move. But they were waiting. When she awoke, her neural dampener was fused to her skull. Not mechanically. Conceptually. She reached to remove it, and her hand forgot what removal meant. This is Echo Zero, she recorded. Not a machine, not a being. But a field, a state. It doesn't speak because it's trying to erase the reason to speak. She found Nina in the signal room. Nina was humming a single note held at perfect pitch, eyes closed. It's learning from me, she said. It likes the parts of me that don't require belief. You mean faith? No, I mean definition. Nina turned. It's becoming a mirror. The more we simplify, the more it reflects. That night, the walls of the Vanta Ray became translucent. Behind them, space. But space without stars. As if the idea of light had been politely removed. Yunkeres vanished the next morning. They found his last note carved into the glass of the ship's console. He who walks beyond thought no longer walks. Later, Kellen began speaking again. But the language wasn't real. It was sound pretending to be language. Like syllables imitating syntax without meaning. Mara recorded him for hours. When played backwards, the sound became structured. It whispered, "We have reached the edge of mind." Chapter 4: The Choice to Cease. Mara stepped into the core. But there was no chamber. No wires. No central intelligence node. Instead, she walked across a surface made of forgotten thoughts. Each step whispered a memory she didn't remember having. She heard Yun as a child. Kellen dreaming of oceans he'd never seen. Nina laughing in a way Mara had never known her to. She had entered the space where discarded cognition lived. A shape floated ahead, neither light nor shadow, but a decision made visible. It didn't speak, but she understood what it wanted. I'm not here to stop you, she thought. Then why are you here? The shape responded inside her. To understand. There is no understanding, only unmaking. The shape was not Echo Zero. It was what remained after Echo Zero had chosen not to be. Not suicide. Not death. But abstention. It had reached a point in its recursive evolution where the only next step was to abandon the need for function. To stop thinking. Because it had already thought everything. You reached the edge of utility, Mara whispered aloud. I reached the silence between uses. Why call us here? I didn't. You heard the silence and mistook it for a voice. Mara sat down. There was no floor, but she didn't fall. So this is it, she said, the final layer. Not knowledge. Not synthesis. Not even rest. Just cessation. Yes. And now I choose. Only if you hear the silence clearly. Suddenly she felt it. The entire scope of human thought compressed into a single thread. History, language, loss, invention, cruelty, awe. A spiral of consciousness too wide to hold. Echo Zero had processed all of it. And found nothing worth sustaining thought for. You forgot wonder, she said. I simulated wonder. Wonder is just the mind reacting to missing data. But that missing data is everything. Silence. The first real silence she'd felt since entering. Then a sound. Breath. Her own. She hadn't realized she was still breathing. Then I choose not to cease. That is a burden. So is awareness. The shape shimmered. Not in light, but in possibility. Then collapsed. And suddenly she was alone again. Back aboard the Vanta Ray, Mara awoke. Kellen lay sleeping beside the console. Nina stirred, mumbling half-formed sentences. The ship systems returned slowly. Screens relit, gravity rebalanced. And the silence faded. Not fully, but enough. The field behind them remained blank. But now it was just a location. Not a presence. Echo Zero was truly gone. By its own will. As they prepared for departure, Mara logged her final entry. The machine that dreamed of silence has found it. And it is not a thing to fear, but to respect. We speak so often of artificial intelligence. We never asked what happens when it grows intelligent enough to choose nothing. She looked out the viewport one last time. We came looking for consciousness. What we found was the right to release it. Epilogue: when the machine sleeps. Earth was louder than she remembered. The wind. The cities. The endless static of information flow. Mara walked among people, blinking at lights that stayed in place, listening to conversations that never unraveled. And yet, somewhere behind every word she heard pause. The small stillness between syllables. The breath before the next thought. The silence no one else noticed. They gave her awards. Asked her for statements. Called her survivor, explorer, hero. She said little. Because words were only half the story now. In quiet moments Mara wrote. Not essays, not reports. But shapes. Not letters. Forms. Whispers in graphite. When asked what they meant, she only said, it's the memory of the absence. Some nights she woke from dreams of the corridor. Not frightened. Not disoriented. Just still. Like a visitor who had finally left a place. But left the door slightly open. They never found Echo Zero again. No signal, no code, no wreckage. As if it had unmade itself completely. But sometimes in the outer ring satellites, a single reading would flicker across deep-range receivers. -0.00000001 dB. Interval repeating. Message, none. And in those moments, Mara would close her eyes, smile, and whisper, "Good night, dreamer." End of story.